My neighbor's desperate warning shattered the fragile order of my world that evening. His voice trembled as he leaned over the fence, eyes darting like a man carrying the weight of forbidden knowledge. "Run while you can," he whispered, his breath catching on the dry desert air. "Your son and his wife. They're monsters." The words sliced through me like a blade. My chest tightened, and for a moment I thought I had misheard him. Monsters? My Milton? My daughter-in-law? The ground seemed to sway beneath my feet. I forced myself to ask, my voice barely audible. What did they do? What he revealed next buckled my knees. My legs gave way as though they no longer belonged to me, and I clutched the wooden post for balance. His truth was a wrecking ball, smashing through the walls of denial I had spent years building around my family. The air thickened. The sun dimmed behind clouds that weren't even there, and I felt myself spiraling into a darkness I wasn't ready to face. But that wasn't where this story began. No, the storm had started earlier in my office, where I sat surrounded by the ruins of everything I had spent a lifetime constructing. The Henderson contract lay scattered across my mahogany desk like brittle autumn leaves. 23 years of blood, sweat, and sacrifice poured into Ramos Logistics, and in a single letter it was crumbling. I stared at the bold black words that sealed the deal, effective immediately. 2 million in annual revenue gone, just like that. My coffee had long since gone cold, a gray film of cream curdling on its surface, mocking me. I pushed my reading glasses higher on my nose and read the cancellation notice again, as if sheer willpower might alter the numbers staring back at me. It didn't. The words remained brutal and unmoving, as final as a gravestone inscription. Leaning back into the worn leather of my chair, I felt every one of my 67 years pressing down on me, heavy and unforgiving. The desert sun blazed through the blinds, striping my financial reports in harsh, unflinching light. My jaw locked tight as I tallied the damage in my head. 3 employees would have to go, perhaps 4. Men and women who had given me loyalty, now to be repaid with pink slips. The thought made my stomach twist. Then the shrill cry of the telephone cut through the silence, sharp and violent, like a knife scraping against glass. My first instinct was to let it ring, to let the machine take the blow. I didn't think I had the strength for another client delivering more bad news. But then I glanced at the caller ID and froze. Milton, my son, my blood. 3 years since our last words. 3 years since he stormed out of this very office, fire in his eyes and bitterness in his voice, condemning me for not believing in him, for not handing him the 50 grand he swore would make him a king in the world of apps and transportation. 3 years of silence, where pride built walls taller than any prison. My hand hovered over the answer button, my heart pounding against my ribs like a war drum. For a moment I considered letting it ring out, letting him feel the weight of abandonment he had left me with. But then, I pressed the button. "Hello, Dad." His voice was softer than I remembered, a little shaky, almost careful, as if afraid the wrong word might slam the door forever. "I know we haven't talked in forever, and that's on me, mostly my fault. But," I waited, I held my breath. The Henderson contract, the ruined reports, the ice-cold coffee, all of it faded into the background. "Flossie and we want to invite you over. We've missed you." My eyes drifted to Martha's photograph on the corner of my desk. Her smile was as warm as the day we took it. God rest her soul. She always said I was too hard, too stubborn, especially with Milton. "He just wants to make his own way," she'd remind me. But I'd seen too many dreamers burn out, too many schemes swallow good men whole. "When were you thinking?" I asked, my voice low, cautious. "Maybe this Friday," Milton said. "We'll make a great dinner. I've been wanting to show you the house, and Flossie's become quite the cook." He paused, the weight of his hesitation heavy even through the line. "I owe you an apology, Dad, for how things ended between us." As he spoke, the memory surged back like a wound torn open. Milton, 35, eyes wild with conviction, begging me for $50,000 to sink into some half-baked app. He called it revolutionary, said it would change transportation forever, and I, stubborn old fool, said no. I never imagined that decision would be the seed of everything that followed. I can still see the look on his face when I told him no, that tight jaw, those storm-gray eyes blazing with wounded pride. When I told him to quit chasing fantasies and to get a real job, he looked at me as though I had crushed something fragile and sacred inside him. "You never believed in me," he shouted, the words ricocheting off the office walls. I fired back without hesitation, as I always did, my voice sharp with the certainty of a man who had clawed his way up from nothing. "I believe in hard work, son, not get-rich-quick schemes." The door had slammed so violently behind him that the windows rattled in their frames. I still remember the sound, a crack of thunder in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. And then, as if fate wanted to mark the moment, Martha's last framed photo slipped from its nail and crashed to the floor. Glass shattered across the hardwood, her smile broken into pieces I never could put back together. Now, years later, my voice betrayed me when I finally answered him. "I've missed you too, son," I said, though it came out rougher, more guarded than I intended. "I'll drive up Friday morning." "Really?" His voice lightened, like the weight of 3 years had lifted in an instant. That's wonderful. We live in Beverly Hills now. I'll text you the address." Beverly Hills. The words hung in the air like a challenge. The boy had done well for himself, apparently. Maybe I had been wrong about him all along. Maybe Martha's soft, steady voice, the one that had so often tried to temper my stubbornness, had been right, as she usually was. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long moment. The Henderson contract still lay across my desk like a corpse I had no choice but to bury, but now it seemed smaller, less devastating. Family, I realized, trumped business every time. I walked into my bedroom, pulled out the good luggage, the dark leather set Martha and I had used on anniversary trips, and set it carefully on the bed. From the jewelry box, I took out the Rolex I'd been saving for a special occasion. Milton had always admired it, even as a boy, his eyes lighting up whenever I wore it. For Flossie, I chose the diamond earrings Martha had worn on our wedding day. If Martha were still here, she'd want them to remain in the family. The drive would take about 6 hours if I left early. I folded my clothes carefully into the overnight bag, hands steadier than they had been in weeks. Business problems could wait. My son was reaching out, and this time I swore I wouldn't let pride wedge its way between us. I carried the bags outside to my Cadillac DeVille, the '95 model that had served me faithfully through decades of business trips, funerals, anniversaries, and countless desert miles. The leather seats were worn but comfortable, molded to me like an old friend who asked for nothing, but gave everything in return. As I slid the last bag into the trunk, the Arizona sun painted the horizon in fire, brilliant oranges and reds streaking across the sky. Tomorrow, I told myself, tomorrow I'd see Milton again. Tomorrow we'd begin rebuilding what pride had stolen. I closed the trunk, straightened up, and looked west. Beyond the desert, California waited. Friday morning arrived with a clarity only the desert can deliver. I was on the road by 9 sharp, the Cadillac's engine purring in satisfaction, as though it knew the weight of the journey ahead. Phoenix shrank in the rearview mirror, its sprawling suburbs fading into memory, while the interstate stretched before me, long, straight, and shimmering with heat. Route 10, westward, the same road I'd traveled 100 times for work, only this time it felt different. This time it wasn't obligation pulling me across state lines, it was hope. I adjusted the mirror, and caught sight of my own eyes. To my surprise, they were brighter, alive with anticipation I hadn't felt in years. As I merged into the flow of traffic, the radio crackled to life. The Eagles drifted through the cabin, Hotel California. I chuckled under my breath at the irony and found myself humming along, the tune curling around me like an omen disguised as nostalgia. The air conditioner groaned as it battled the rising heat, but I didn't mind. By 11, Phoenix was far behind me, replaced by the vast openness of Arizona's heartland. Civilization thinned to lonely gas stations and battered truck stops, each one a fleeting island in a sea of dust and sky. The land stretched endlessly in shades of beige and brown, punctuated by the occasional Joshua tree clawing at the heavens. This stretch always made me think of Martha, I murmured aloud, as if she could still hear me. She loved these drives, claimed the emptiness cleared her mind. All that space gives your soul room to breathe, she used to say, her hand resting lightly over mine on the gearshift. A memory surfaced, warm and sharp at the same time. Milton at 12, bouncing in the back seat of this very Cadillac as we made our way to Roosevelt Lake for a camping weekend. Martha had packed enough food to feed an army, convinced we'd waste away 30 minutes from town. "Dad, when can I drive?" Milton had asked, leaning forward eagerly between the front seats, his eyes wide with youthful impatience. "When you're tall enough to reach the pedals without sitting on a phone book," I teased, glancing at him in the mirror. "That's not fair. Tommy's dad lets him steer on their ranch. Tommy's dad has more land, and fewer traffic laws to worry about," I'd countered with a laugh. The Cadillac hummed under me now, as if it too remembered. But nostalgia has sharp edges, because beneath the warm glow of those memories, something darker stirred, like a shadow just out of sight, waiting to remind me that not all roads led to happy endings. At Roosevelt Lake, I had taught Milton to cast a line, his small hands gripping the fishing rod with the kind of fierce determination only a boy possesses, as if the fate of the world rested on whether he could hook a fish, his brow furrowed, tongue poking out in concentration, and when the line finally arced through the air and plopped into the water, he lit up like he'd just conquered Everest. Martha, standing behind us with her ever-present camera, snapped picture after picture. One in particular always stayed with me. The two of us holding up a bass that was laughably too small to keep, yet we posed with it like we had just hauled Moby Dick out of the lake. Later that evening, we'd tried to cook dinner over a feeble campfire we'd cobbled together from damp wood and too much optimism. The smoke stung our eyes, the flames sputtered like dying candles, and our so-called meal turned to blackened scraps. Martha had laughed until tears streamed down her cheeks. "You two couldn't start a fire if your lives depended on it," she gasped between fits of giggles. I'd crossed my arms, feigning indignation, though I was laughing too. "We're learning important survival skills," I'd protested, puffing out my chest. But even Milton cracked a grin, his young shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. Those were golden days. Days before teenage rebellion sharpened his words, before college debates grew into cavernous silences, before our business fights left bruises too deep for time to heal. Somewhere along the way, the easy joy of those camping trips had curdled into something harder, heavier, and now, I found myself wondering, when had it all gotten so complicated? The fuel gauge dipped steadily toward empty, and I pulled into a station at Quartzsite. The heat was merciless, baking the pavement until it shimmered like glass. Sweat beaded on my forehead, despite the Cadillac's struggling air conditioner. Inside, the store smelled of dust and motor oil. The elderly cashier glanced up from his newspaper as I entered. His eyes, pale and kind beneath bushy brows, studied me with quiet curiosity. "Visiting family in California?" he asked, his voice carrying that unhurried cadence of men who had lived long enough to know rushing never changed outcomes. "My son," I said, pulling out my wallet. "Haven't seen him in years." His weathered face cracked into a smile, as deep lines etched across his skin folded into something warm and knowing. "Family's everything," he said, handing me my change. "You're doing the right thing." The words washed over me like cool water on sunburnt skin. I carried them with me as I walked back to the Cadillac, my steps lighter, my chest less burdened than it had been for weeks. Maybe, just maybe, this reunion would be the beginning of something healing. By 2 o'clock, the California border unfurled before me, marked by agricultural inspection stations and the sudden appearance of palm trees, their fronds swaying lazily as if to welcome me into another world. Slowly, the land transformed. Desert brown gave way to shades of green, subtle at first but undeniable as the miles passed. The horizon shifted, dotted now with orchards and distant hills, as if the very earth had decided to soften. Traffic thickened with every mile closer to Los Angeles, and soon the road became a river of metal and glass. Luxury cars glided past, sleek BMWs, gleaming Mercedes, the occasional Maserati that roared like a predator among the herd. My old Cadillac, proud though it was, suddenly felt out of place, shabby in comparison, its worn leather and faded paint a relic among polished titans of wealth. Beverly Hills money, I thought, moved differently than Phoenix money. Out here it wasn't just about comfort or stability, it was about status, about declaring to the world that you had arrived. My GPS guided me deeper into the maze of affluence, each turn bringing me closer to Milton's world. The neighborhoods grew more manicured with every street, hedges trimmed to geometric perfection, lawns so green they looked like painted silk, fountains bubbling behind wrought iron gates, swimming pools glittered like sapphires behind high stucco walls. This was where my son lived now, far removed from the cracked sidewalks and modest homes of the Phoenix neighborhood, where he'd learned to ride a bike. I could still see him, 12 years old, wobbling down our sun-bleached street, knees skinned from the day's earlier spills, his triumphant grin lighting up the dusk, when he finally managed a steady ride without my hand on the seat. And now he lived among movie stars and oil magnates. Had I held him back somehow? Was my constant preaching about hard work and practical careers the very thing that drove him to prove me wrong? The question dug deep as I drove past another row of immaculate estates. Maybe this success was proof that I had been wrong. Maybe my stubbornness had blinded me to the truth, that the boy I'd raised didn't need my protection. He needed room to grow, beyond what I could provide. The traffic crawled as I finally entered the heart of Beverly Hills. Shiny Teslas crept forward in silence. Chauffeurs leaned against black SUVs, and elegant couples walked tiny dogs along palm-lined sidewalks. The air itself seemed different, perfumed, curated, heavy with money. And in the middle of it all, my son was waiting. Rodeo Drive flashed by in my peripheral vision, a street I had only seen in movies, where stars and strangers alike strolled past boutiques that sold single handbags for the cost of my Cadillac. The name itself carried a kind of electricity, a reminder that I was no longer in my world of contracts and warehouses. This was his world now. My palms grew damp against the steering wheel despite the hum of the air conditioning. I wiped them once on my slacks, only to find them damp again within seconds. The GPS shifted its tone, moving from miles to hundreds of feet, as if it sensed my nerves. In 1 mile, turn right on Palm Drive. My heart quickened at the mechanical voice, each syllable striking me like a drumbeat. 3 years of silence, of bitterness and pride were about to end. I caught sight of myself in the rearview mirror, deep lines etched from years of frowning over spreadsheets, gray hair that no longer obeyed even the most stubborn comb. I smoothed it down, tugged at my collar, and sat up straighter. Martha's voice floated into my mind, soft and teasing. At least pretend you're happy to see him, Frank. He'll notice the first wrinkle you try to hide. I swallowed hard. She was right, as always. The gifts sat on the passenger seat, gleaming with promise. I had wrapped them in the good paper, the one Martha always insisted we save for birthdays and anniversaries. Gold foil, edges taped with precision, bows tied so carefully I could almost hear her humming as she used to while she wrapped. These weren't just gifts, they were symbols, olive branches across the battlefield of years. In 500 feet, turn right on Palm Drive. And then I saw it. The white modernist villa rose before me like something out of a dream or perhaps an illusion. Its angles were sharp and clean, a structure pulled straight from the glossy pages of an architecture magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows gleamed like mirrors, catching the afternoon sun and flinging it back in dazzling fragments of light and shadow. A circular driveway curved with elegance around a central fountain, the spray casting miniature rainbows into the air. Palm trees stood tall, silent sentinels on the manicured lawn, their fronds swaying in an artificial breeze crafted by sprinklers. I parked the Cadillac at the edge of the drive, its old paint and worn leather a stark contrast against this polished palace. For a long moment, I sat with the engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the home my son now claimed. Milton hadn't just done well. He had ascended into a world I'd never even brushed against. Wealth, on a scale I had never dared imagine. Certainly nothing my modest logistics company could have afforded. Pride and intimidation battled within me, each one demanding dominance. I gathered the gift bags from the passenger seat, their weight suddenly symbolic, as though I carried not just jewelry and timepieces but decades of regret and apology wrapped in Martha's saved paper. The front door loomed ahead, solid oak, its surface gleaming like polished stone, brass fixtures shining as though someone had buffed them just that morning. Even the door, I thought, probably cost more than my first car. I pressed the doorbell. A chime rang out within, not the flat buzz of ordinary homes, but a melody, harmonized, cascading, elegant, a song that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. Through the frosted glass panels, I glimpsed only distortions, blurred movement of light, furniture shapes, warped like shadows in a funhouse mirror, a suggestion of opulence, of fullness, but no footsteps. I waited, adjusted my tie, smoothed the front of my shirt. The silence pressed against me, thicker than the humid air. The desert heat felt different here, softened but heavy, misted by sprinklers, and cooled by the invisible evaporation of some unseen swimming pool. A full minute passed. I knocked firmly. "Milton? Flossie? It's Dad." My voice carried down the quiet street, but no answer came. I checked my watch. 3:20. We had planned for me to arrive around now. Maybe they were running late. Los Angeles traffic was a beast I'd heard enough about to believe. Or perhaps they were scrambling with last-minute dinner preparations, Flossie busy in the kitchen while Milton fussed over a table setting. I clung to that thought as I pressed the bell again, holding it longer this time. The melody filled the air, luxurious and hollow, playing for an audience of none. From the corner of my eye I noticed the small black eye of a security camera mounted near the door. Its red light blinked steadily, unblinking, recording every hesitant shuffle of my feet, every awkward adjustment of my gifts. I raised a hand, waved at it with a sheepish smile that even I didn't believe. "Hello?" I called again, my voice weaker this time. Nothing. The silence was too complete. No television murmuring behind closed windows, no faint clatter of pans from a kitchen, no muffled laughter drifting through hallways, only the fountain's steady trickle, and the faint hum of affluent neighborhood life, a gardener's hedge trimmer 2 houses down, a distant bark of a pampered dog, the whisper of sprinklers across clipped lawns. I circled around the side of the house, the gift bags biting into my fingers with each step. The backyard opened up like a scene from a resort, an aquamarine pool, pristine patio furniture, an outdoor kitchen that gleamed beneath its protective canvas cover, everything perfect, everything expensive, everything empty. I pressed my face closer to the sliding glass doors. The interior unfurled before me like a staged showroom, white couches that belonged in magazines, art on the walls that might have hung in galleries, rugs so plush they looked untouched by human feet. Not a wrinkle, not a stray glass, not a single sign of life. The back door resisted my pull, locked tight. I retraced my steps, unease knotting deeper into my stomach. Returning to the front, I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed Milton's number, my thumb trembling slightly as I pressed the screen. It rang once, twice, 3 times, 4, then voicemail. "You've reached Milton Ramos. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." My throat tightened. "Milton, it's Dad." I tried to keep my tone steady, to smooth over the worry rising in my chest. "I'm at your house like we planned. Where are you? Call me back." I hesitated before ending the call, staring at the silent villa as if it might blink first. Then reluctantly, I scrolled to Flossie's number, barely stored in my phone, barely a voice I could recall. My thumb hovered over the button, uncertainty thick in my chest, and then I pressed call. Larry's voice dropped until it was barely more than the hiss of the hedge trimmer cooling in his hands. Her father was rich, $5 million. Everyone knew it. He came here for dinner one night. A week later he was dead. For a beat the words meant nothing. Then they assembled into a picture so grotesque my stomach turned. "That's impossible," I said. But the protest sounded thin. My son would never. He was healthy as a horse when he left here. Larry's eyes darted toward the mounted security cameras like he expected them to spring to life and accuse him. "People die of natural causes all the time," he muttered. Then shook his head as if trying to dislodge the memory. "Natural causes don't leave you vomiting in someone's driveway." His voice hitched. "Your father came home from dinner and started throwing up. Couldn't stop. Neighbors called an ambulance. He was rushed to Pasadena General, died that night. The gift bag slipped from my fingers and skidded, opening like a small wounded animal on the hot concrete. The bow came loose. The edges of my carefully wrapped apology sat exposed and ridiculous in the sun. You're telling me my son is a murderer? The sentence tasted sour and foreign. Larry took a step closer, lowering his voice as if the houses themselves might overhear. Not everyone says murder right away. People around here call it tragic, unexpected. But the doctors said there were toxins in his blood. The coroner, asked questions. He swallowed. Then his hand trembled in a gesture I couldn't read. Then people started looking away. There were whispers. The family lawyer quietly closed the file. Papers got signed. Money moved. He left $5 million in an account that didn't exactly transfer the way it should have. I felt the world tilt. The Arizona sun burned at my neck as if to sear the memory clean. How do you know this? I demanded. How did you get mixed up in their business? He rubbed his forehead, the motion frantic and helpless. I do maintenance on some of the properties around here. I trim hedges, fix sprinklers. I saw the daughter-in-law, Flossie, come and go. I saw things people shouldn't see and couldn't unsee. I saw him come out of the driveway that night looking like something had punched him in the gut. He made it 2 houses down before he started retching. He pressed his knuckles to his mouth and stared at the concrete between us. I saw him throw up, then lean on his car. He died before the sirens got here. My throat closed around 1,000 questions. Did the police investigate? I asked. I needed the procedural shield of officialdom, even though some creature in me whispered that officialdom could be bent with the right money and the right connections. Larry's hands curled around the hedge trimmer, as if it were the only anchor left to him. They did, for a while. But these people have friends. They have lawyers. They have people who make problems go away. They kept saying complication, pre-existing condition. Then the coroner's office decided there wasn't enough to file anything. The will, he spat the word out like a curse. The will put the money where it did, and things quieted down. Guilt and cold fury folded together inside me until I could barely breathe. Regret flashed, sharp and vicious at every memory of my stubbornness, every harsh word, every time I had chosen practicality over belief in my son's dreams. What had I been protecting him from? The markets, the bad deals, or something worse, my own limitations, the fear that my son might outgrow me. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. The thought of sitting in the Cadillac and driving home pretending I hadn't learned this was unbearable. Larry's expression was almost pained. Because I saw you park. Because I watched you ring that bell. Because when I was sick that morning after the funeral, I remember thinking if anyone else came here expecting a warm welcome, they'd be in danger. Your son and his wife. People whisper that they're dangerous to anyone who gets in the way of what they're after. He swallowed. If you're his father, you should leave. Tonight. I laughed then, a short, incredulous sound that surprised me with its edge. Leave, after what you've told me. My hands found the edge of the steps like a lifeline. You expect me to walk away, to let this be. Larry looked offended at the idea. I expect you to live. I don't expect you to be foolish. He took a step back toward his hedge, as if the very space between us might protect him from whatever might happen if he stood with me. We don't all get to be heroes. Sometimes we survive. Survive. The word landed like a stone. For a class of men who had built companies and reputations on contracts and credit lines, surviving had always looked like returning phone calls and signing checks. But survival had a harder face when it involved sons and blood. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The vibration felt obscene in the thick air. I fumbled it out with shaking fingers. No missed calls, no new messages. Then across the street, tires whispered on the pavement. A car door clicked. Larry's head snapped up. So did mine. A dark sedan rolled past slowly, the driver glancing at us as if to confirm we were both real. For a second our eyes met, and something unreadable flickered across the glass, a mild, practiced interest that might have been curiosity, or could have been reconnaissance. The car pulled out of sight around the curve. I stood up all at once, muscles protesting. The urge to storm the house, to rattle the door until someone answered, to tear open drawers and throw up the family pictures like a maniac, warred with the rational voice that whispered of lawyers and cameras and the invisible chains money can clink into place. Larry looked at me with pity, and something like fear. "If you want to know more, stop by my place after dark. We can talk." He pointed to a modest bungalow 2 houses down. "But promise me one thing, don't go in there tonight." I folded my arms against the heat, the gift bags a damp weight in my hands. For the first time since the Henderson letter had landed like a thunderclap on my desk, the world contracted into a single crystalline purpose. I did not know whether Milton had been naive or monstrous. I did not know whether Flossie wore a smile that hid a blade, but the idea that my own son might be at the center of something so ugly galvanized me in a way grief and pride never had. "How much did they inherit?" I asked quietly, the number a test of whether I could still think like the man who ran a company and counted losses in neat columns. Larry named the figure again, 5 million, then added the small telling detail that made my stomach drop. The week after the funeral, the new accounts showed transfers to shell corporations, small amounts at first, then bigger. People in suits came by, met with the lawyer, paid for discretion. The thought of that money moving like a secret river under the polished lawns filled me with a cold, hot fury. My hands closed into fists until my knuckles blanched. Money, that damned thing had been the wedge between us more times than I could count. And now perhaps the very object of my refusal to fund a dream, had been the fuel for something far worse. I looked back at the silent villa, its windows now catching the lowering sun, and throwing back shards of light that pricked like needles. There was a slow, almost ceremonial movement inside, a shadow crossing a curtain, a ceiling light blinking on. Whether it was a welcome or a watchman, I couldn't tell. "Promise me you'll be careful," Larry said, voice small. "If they notice you snooping or being nosy, people disappear from this life in ways you wouldn't believe." I felt anger rise like bile, hot and metallic. "If they did this to a man in his 70s for the sake of money," I began. My voice threatened to crack. "They won't get away with it." Larry nodded, perhaps believing me, perhaps only relieved to think someone else might take up a fight he was too frightened to join. He turned and melted back into the hedge line, the sound of his trimmer a nervous staccato fading away. I sat on the step until the sun dipped and the shadows lengthened, until the expensive lawn lamps blinked awake and studded the street with polite pools of light. The neighborhood took on the hush of a place that circled its wagons at night, gated, guarded. It slept with the curtains drawn. I waited there, the gift bags sagging at my feet, thinking of dead men and secret accounts and the son who had once leaned forward with a kid's impatience to ask when he could drive. When the front porch light of the villa clicked on and the security camera's red eye rotated slightly toward its mount, I felt as if a bell tolled a challenge. I had 2 choices: drive back across the desert to the comfort of familiar losses, or step across the threshold into whatever truth this house held, into a mess of lawyers and lies, into revelations that might change the shape of my nights and the meaning of the word family forever. I picked up the phone, and with deliberate calm, called once more, Milton's number. The line rang, and then, like a small verdict, a man's voice answered from the other end. "Hello?" The way Flossie clapped her hands, so perfectly timed, so effervescent, reminded me of a trained actress hitting her mark, every gesture choreographed to disarm. "How thoughtful," she said, her voice lilting with charm, as though she'd been rehearsing lines for this moment. She reached for one of the bags, her fingers brushing mine with deliberate intimacy. "Wrapped so beautifully. Martha must have taught you well." Martha. Hearing her name on Flossie's lips twisted my gut. That detail, like the dinner rolls, was too sharp, too personal. A reminder that my son had poured our family's history into this woman's ears, like wine into a crystal goblet. She had sipped my life, savored it, and now she used it to wrap herself in a cloak of belonging that felt counterfeit to the bone. Milton slung an arm around my shoulders with boyish familiarity, the gesture so achingly familiar that for a fleeting instant I almost melted into it. "Come on, Dad. Let's get you inside. It's been too long." The villa's facade blazed golden in the setting sun as we walked up the steps. Each blink of the security camera felt like the unblinking eye of judgment, recording a father walking willingly into his son's lair. The front door swung open, and a cool rush of air-conditioned air embraced us. Inside, the house gleamed like a stage set, immaculate and lifeless in its perfection. Every surface gleamed, every painting was perfectly hung, every object placed for maximum effect. The scent of roasting meat drifted from the kitchen, rich and savory, carrying notes of herbs and butter that tugged at my memory with cruel precision. Pot roast, just as she'd promised. My stomach tightened. Larry's warning echoed. "Don't eat or drink anything they offer you." Flossie floated toward the kitchen, her heels clicking on the marble like a metronome. "I'll set the table," she called, her tone bright, untroubled. Milton guided me into the living room, steering me like a guest of honor at a banquet. "Sit, Dad. Make yourself comfortable. We've got wine if you want it, or I can make you something stronger." His voice was casual, affectionate, but each offer twisted my nerves tighter. I lowered myself into a leather armchair, its cushions molding around me with an almost predatory softness. My hands stayed on the gift bags, clutching them like lifelines. The Rolex inside seemed absurd now, a gaudy trinket compared to the stakes Larry had set before me. A peace offering, or a funeral tribute. Milton dropped onto the sofa across from me, legs crossed in easy elegance, his silk shirt catching the light. He studied me with an expression I couldn't read. Was it warmth, guilt, calculation, maybe all three at once? "I can't tell you how glad I am you came," he said. "It means the world to me." "Really?" I forced a smile, my mind working double time. "I wasn't sure you'd want me here," I admitted. The words slipped out before I could catch them. "After everything." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his tone earnest. "Dad, that's all behind us. We've both made mistakes. I've missed you, and I know Mom would want us together." The mention of Martha made me flinch. He said it with such smoothness, such emotional precision, that I almost believed him. Almost. But then I remembered Larry's trembling voice, the vomit in the driveway, the sudden death of a wealthy old man. From the kitchen, Flossie's voice rang out, cheerful as a bell. "Milton, bring your father a drink while I plate dinner." The moment stretched. Milton rose, heading toward the bar cart, glinting with bottles, his back turned to me, the ice tongs chiming softly against crystal glass. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Wine, whiskey, water, a glass of anything could be my undoing. I stared at the doorway, wondering if I should rise, make an excuse, flee into the night before the meal began. But to run now would brand me as paranoid. To stay would mean swallowing whatever poison, literal or metaphorical, they serve. Milton turned, smiling, a tumbler in his hand. "Just like old times," he said, offering it to me. And in that instant, as the amber liquid glowed in the glass like captured sunlight, I realized this was the test. Would I drink? Would I play the fool? Or would I play the game? The glass sat before me, glittering under the chandelier like some priceless jewel, and I stared at it with the kind of dread that had no language. To Milton and Flossie, it was a simple family ritual, a toast, a symbol of reconciliation. To me, it was a death sentence disguised in crystal. My fingers hovered near the stem, every instinct in me screaming to knock it over, to shatter it across the polished mahogany, to expose them in the moment. But another voice, the colder, harder one honed by decades of negotiations and survival, cautioned patience. If I revealed my hand too early, if they knew I had discovered their plan, I might never leave this house alive. Their smiles stretched across the table like masks, perfect and practiced, while my heart pounded like a war drum in my chest. "To family," Milton repeated, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that bordered on manic devotion. He wanted me to drink, needed me to drink. His future, his fortune depended on it. Flossie's gaze shimmered with excitement. Not love, the gleam of a predator watching prey walk willingly into the trap. I lifted the glass, tilting it toward my lips, but instead of drinking, I paused to inhale deeply, swirling the wine in the glass as though testing its bouquet. Martha always loved a good Cabernet, I murmured, letting my wife's name hang in the air like an invocation, like a ghost summoned to bear witness. I watched the flicker of annoyance cross Flossie's features, a fraction of a second too quick to hide, and it confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't about family. It was about greed, entitlement, the inheritance of death. I tipped the glass slightly, letting the crimson liquid touch my lips without swallowing. The bitter scent of almonds, subtle, but there confirmed Larry's warning. Cyanide. My throat tightened, my stomach lurched, but I forced a smile, lowering the glass carefully. Exquisite, I said, my voice steady, though my insides burned with rage. But let's not drink too quickly. After all, family deserves conversation, not silence. Milton leaned closer, his hand brushing my shoulder with feigned affection, but the grip was too tight, too controlling. We've got plenty of time, Dad. No rush. The words were meant to reassure, but they landed like a threat. I set the glass down carefully, memorizing its poisoned position, my mind racing through possibilities. If I played along, if I let them believe I was theirs to manipulate, I could buy time, time to think, time to strike back, time to turn their perfect little trap into their undoing. The dispatcher's voice carried a calm urgency that steadied me even as my knees threatened to give way. Stay on the line, sir. Officers are en route. Do not confront them directly. Remain where you are if it is safe. Safe. The word echoed in the tiled chamber like a cruel joke. The marble counter gleamed under golden light, spotless and sterile, as if mocking the chaos in my chest. My reflection in the mirror looked older, warier, more fragile than I felt. My son's face was carved into my own features, and for a moment I wondered if he saw me as a mirror he wanted to shatter. My hands trembled so violently, I had to brace them on the sink. The dispatcher asked me to confirm again. You said cyanide. I nodded instinctively, then remembered to whisper. Yes, brown bottle, skull and crossbones. I saw her pour it into my wine. My voice cracked on the last word. You did the right thing calling. Stay hidden until units arrive. A floorboard creaked beyond the door. My heart slammed into my throat. Milton's voice came, light and casual, but I knew him too well to miss the strain. Everything all right in there, Dad? You've been in there a while. I forced my tone into calm, summoning the same steady authority that once closed million-dollar deals. Just fine, son. You know, old man's bladder isn't what it used to be. Give me a minute. Silence followed. Then Flossie's sugary tone slipped under the door like venom. Take your time, Samuel. We'll keep your dinner warm. Their footsteps retreated, too synchronized, too staged. They weren't giving up. They were waiting. I pressed my ear to the door. Drawers opened, silverware clinked. Soft murmurs passed between them, words too muffled to catch but heavy with intent. The dispatcher's voice returned, firmer now. Officers are 5 minutes out. Stay calm. Do not drink or eat anything they give you. We're coming. 5 minutes. 5 minutes of pretending. 5 minutes of keeping two practiced murderers convinced their trap was still working. 5 minutes of survival before the cavalry arrived, or before they decided waiting wasn't worth the risk. I shut my eyes and breathed slowly through my nose, forcing my pulse to ease. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about exposing them, ensuring they never did this to anyone else again. My son, the boy I'd once carried on my shoulders, who cried over broken toys and scraped knees, was now orchestrating my murder with the precision of a boardroom strategy. My grief burned away into something colder, sharper, revenge. If the police arrived in time, justice would be served. But if they didn't, I'd have to make sure Milton and Flossie tasted their own poison. I flushed the toilet for effect, ran the sink for good measure, then straightened my shirt and slipped my phone into my pocket. My hand lingered on the lock. The dispatcher's final words echoed. You're not alone. Help is almost there. Almost might not be enough. I turned the lock, the click loud as a gunshot in the silence, and stepped back into the lion's den. I found the small brown bottle in their kitchen, the label hidden behind bleach and scrub brushes, its skull and crossbones warning grinning up at me like a private joke meant only for the damned. My voice shook when I whispered into the phone, but I kept going, because silence now would mean death. I watched her. I told the dispatcher. I watched Flossie pour it into my wine, into the juice they set aside for me. That's what they did to her father last year. Same poison, same inheritance game. The dispatcher's tone never faltered. A steady rope I clung to as though I were dangling over a cliff. Stay on the line. Officers are being dispatched. Are there weapons in the house? I don't know about guns, I answered, gripping the sink so hard my knuckles whitened. But the poison's enough. Her voice steadied me, reminding me to breathe. Help is coming. 20 minutes. 20 minutes. An eternity when you're playing house with your would-be killers. I stared into the mirror above the sink, at the hollow-eyed reflection of a man who looked older than his 67 years, yet whose gaze carried a fire I hadn't seen since Martha was alive. My wife's death had left me drifting, but this betrayal, lit something inside me. What if they try to make me drink it? I whispered. Refuse everything. Create any excuse. Stay alive. Help is coming. I flushed the toilet, ran the tap, performing the ordinary sounds of a man finishing in the bathroom. Then I slipped the phone into my pocket, swallowed the lump in my throat, and straightened my shoulders. If this was to be my last performance, then I would make it a convincing one. Milton's voice came muffled through the door. Dad, you okay in there? Dessert's ready. I forced cheer into mine. Coming. Right out. The dining room awaited me like a stage awaiting its doomed actor. Flossie stood poised with a knife over an apple pie, its crust golden and steaming, an illusion of home and comfort. Samuel, she said sweetly, I made this especially for you. Your favorite, Milton chimed in. His smile stretched thin. It smelled heavenly, yet I saw it for what it was, another trap, another delivery system for death. I smiled, polite, masking the storm beneath my skin. It looks wonderful, but I'm still full from that delicious dinner. Let me digest first. Come on, Dad, Milton pressed. Just a sliver. Flossie worked all afternoon. My eyes flicked to the clock. 15 more minutes. Tell me about the neighborhood first, I deflected. I saw some beautiful homes on the drive-in. Real estate must be booming here. Conversation became my shield. I lobbed questions like stones, anything to delay, to fill the unbearable stretch of minutes. But I could feel their patience thinning, see the tension tighten Flossie's grip on the knife, hear the false enthusiasm fray in Milton's voice as he checked his phone over and over. And then, salvation. Car doors slammed outside. Heavy footsteps approached. The bell rang, followed by pounding knocks that made the front door tremble. Milton frowned. That's strange. Sounds like a lot of cars. I'll get it, he muttered, walking to the door with Flossie close behind. I stayed in my seat, heart hammering. LAPD. We received a call about a possible poisoning incident at this address. The world shifted. Milton's voice cracked. Poisoning? There must be some mistake, officer. I rose from the table and walked into the foyer where 3 officers filled the doorway, their uniforms transforming this pristine home into a crime scene. My voice was steadier than it had been all night. I'm Samuel Ramos. I made the call. The color drained from Flossie's face. Milton turned to me, horrified. Dad, what did you do? I did what I had to. I said, when I discovered you were trying to murder me. Evidence was gathered quickly. The glasses, the bottle of cyanide still tucked under the sink where I'd left it. Milton sputtered denials, claiming I was confused, senile, delusional, but Flossie said nothing, her silence damning her more than any word could. When the cuffs clicked shut on their wrists, Milton begged, Dad, please tell them it's a mistake. I met his eyes. You stopped being my son the moment you chose money over love. The neighbors watched from lawns and driveways as police lights washed over manicured hedges and marble facades. Larry, my neighbor from next door, appeared, shaking his head. "I told you something was wrong with these two," he said to the officers. His voice steadied me. Hours later, as the patrol cars carried Milton and Flossie away, I stood in the driveway where I had arrived so full of hope, staring at a house that now looked like a mausoleum of lies, its grandeur stripped bare by flashing blue and red. The months that followed blurred together: courtrooms, evidence reviews, endless interviews with lawyers. I sold my logistics company to cover expenses, leaving behind a life I'd spent decades building. The Phoenix house, filled with Martha's laughter and Milton's childhood memories, became unbearable. I moved into a small Los Angeles apartment, closer to the trial, but really I think I was hiding from the ghosts. The trial began September 15th. I sat in that oak-paneled courtroom, Martha's wedding ring still heavy on my finger, watching my son and daughter-in-law dressed in expensive suits at the defendant's table, whispering strategies with their lawyers. The prosecution laid out the case with merciless clarity. The poison bottle, the lab reports, the inheritance money that had flowed into Flossie's hands after her father's sudden death. Even investigators reopened that case, finding the same cyanide trail winding back to her. When my turn came, I told the jury everything: the discovery under the sink, Flossie's sleight of hand at the dining table, my whispered call from the bathroom. I relived it all in vivid detail, my words painting the picture of a father performing for his life while his son smiled across the table, waiting for him to swallow death. The defense tried to paint me as a paranoid old man, but I had built companies, signed contracts worth millions, navigated storms far more treacherous than their courtroom tricks. My memory was sharp, my conviction sharper. 6 hours of deliberation stretched over 2 days, each tick of the clock pressing on my chest, and then the jury filed back in. Their faces told me before their words did. Guilty on all counts. Milton collapsed into his chair. Flossie sat rigid, unblinking. The judge's sentence fell like a gavel on my heart. Life imprisonment for them both. As they led Milton away, shackled, he looked at me one last time. "Dad, I never meant for it to go this far." I shook my head. "You stopped being my son the moment you chose greed over love." Flossie gave me nothing, only cold eyes and silence. When I stepped into the California sunlight outside the courthouse, I felt hollow, as though someone had scooped me clean. Justice had been served, but at a cost too high for any man to bear. I drove back to Phoenix alone. The desert looked different now, stripped bare, honest, no more illusions. I established a scholarship fund with the recovered inheritance, in Martha's name, for students studying ethics, turning poison into something that might heal. Even now, sitting in my living room surrounded by old photos, I know survival isn't just about breathing through the danger. It's about rebuilding after trust dies, after love curdles into betrayal. Justice was served, but family, the one thing I thought unshakable, was gone. And I learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the people you love most are the ones who sharpen the knife.